Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Let it go.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm your host for today, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest is Dr. Milton Hook. How are you, Milton?
I'm fine, thanks for an old fella.
Great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Milton, of course, wrote this book. Would you call it like a biography of Des Ford, or is it mainly focusing on a certain era?
It's mainly a biography, yes. Yeah.
Now, I've got some copies of the book here in my office if people would like to buy a copy, or you can simply go to Amazon and get a copy there. And this is the updated version as well. Now, today we're going to get straight into it. Recently, the Record, the what would you call it? The church paper that goes out every week to all the churches in Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, put out an article which was kind of a retrospective. They were looking at an article that had been written about Glacier View in the Australian Record, and I think I'm not sure when that actually came out, but the article was kind of showing how much that the church likes to be there on the ground and keeps people in touch with current events. And they commented on it, wrote a little bit about it, but made a few errors that I guess we're trying to set straight. So first up, what did you think when you read the article? Feel free to hold it up anytime. I know you've got a copy. And what were some of the errors that we need to look at and perhaps address, and why? Why is it important?
Well, it's I'll just hold it up. That's the cover. And on the bottom corner, it has 125th anniversary. In other words, the Record was first published in 1898. And they're celebrating their 125th anniversary by, well, all this year they've been running a series of articles called Record Rewind. And this was the latest 2-page spread that dealt with Glacier View. They're really in a backslapping mode really self-congratulating themselves on how they have, over the 125 years, provided truthful information about the church.
And you're suggesting that perhaps that's not so truthful as they'd like to imagine?
No, we can probably deal with some points where I would differ with it. I don't normally reply to anonymous articles. This one doesn't have any names to it. I believe the online version had the words record staff.
Okay.
Written by record staff. They're not named at all. It's an unfortunate practice that the record has fallen into over the years, not just in this type of article, but also in their letters to the editor, or what they call these days conversations. Even in this very issue, they have one letter, and I'll hold it up. I don't know whether you can see it, but it's signed by a chap at the bottom. His name is just Mark.
Right. Yeah.
In New South Wales. We have no idea who he is.
Yeah.
Previously, they have just put name withheld. And I mean, if a person is going to express an opinion, they're courageous about it, they ought to have their name put to it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If they don't, well, I've got to say, I think they're cowards. As I say, I don't normally reply to them, but in this case, because of the serious nature, serious errors which they're propounding here, I thought I would have a word to say.
Yeah. Look, I appreciate that, and I agree with what you've said as well.
There's no critical analysis either in this particular article, like most of the articles. They have used, they've gone back and they've looked at some of their earlier records, and they've looked at previous articles that appeared in the Adventist Review, which were reprinted, incidentally, in the record back in the 1980s. That's their sources. But I've got to say that the church periodicals, like any other church periodical, no matter what church we're talking about, they all give only the positive outlook. It's a sugar-coated version of reporting. In my writing, I use these magazines all the time. When I'm writing about articles concerning the Australasian Division, I use the record. When I'm writing articles about people and history events in the North American Division, I use the Adventist Review, Pacific Union Recorder, Atlantic Leaner, and numerous other periodicals. When I'm writing articles about the history in the Chinese division, I use the Oriental Reporter, Oriental Mission News, and so on and so forth. But all the time that I'm using these, I'm continually scraping off the sugar coating to get to the vital details underneath, and use only those. otherwise it becomes quite triumphalistic, eulogistic, if you like. Yeah.
Mm.
So I would regard this article that we're talking about as, well, it's self-promotional, really. It's even narcissistic. It's triumphalistic. It's typical. It's got the little Jack Horner syndrome in it. The little Jack Horner syndrome. What a good boy am I. Uh, what a good publication we are. What a good church we belong to. That sort of attitude.
Mm. I remember a time in the 80s and I guess into the 90s where there was a lot more freedom to engage with the record. Letters had people's names, where they were from often. There was a cartoon in it that would kind of, you know, what is it when you mock yourself? Um, and there
Yeah,
were
you're laughing
also,
at yourself. Yeah.
yeah, and there were ways that you could even advertise independent ministries or products or whatever in the back as well. Um, it seems to have become bound and more controlled over the ensuing decades. Have you noticed that as well?
Yes, I think so. You're referring to the cartoons of the 1980s and some that
Yeah,
Berto did.
Berto, that's right. Yeah,
He got a lot of criticism from the what I would call the right wing section of the church, but they persisted until finally it fell away.
yeah.
And it has become more controlled. I think that's worldwide.
Mm,
Coming
yeah.
from
I'll just quickly bring up a comment because I think it's important. Steve Beagles has written, by the way, happy birthday, Stephen. Stephen's one of our regular viewers, and it's his birthday today. He has said, we all want to claim objectivity, but none of us has it mastered. Not sure that really applies to this situation in the sense that we're talking about out of control overviewing and propaganda.
Yeah, I would be the last one to claim perfect objectivity.
Yeah.
In fact, in the book that you just held up, in the preface, I think I made mention of the fact that there is inevitably some bias,
Yeah.
particularly when you're writing with fervour. Bias does come in, but historians follow certain rules. It's a scientific discipline, and those scientific rules are meant to limit the amount of subjectivity.
Yeah. And so when people do say, look, they've just missed the mark, what would you say to that in this case? Why is this more severe than the average person who's, claiming objectivity, but obviously has a little bit of bias? What's different about the record
Yeah.
having bias and in this case producing something that's, I guess, incorrect?
Well, they've simply used the two sources, their own magazine plus the Adventist Review, without any critical analysis of the sources. And some of the statements they have made shows that they do not know what happened in 1980 at Glacier View. The reports that came through via the Review and Herald after Glacier View were, of course, friendly towards their viewpoint. To some extent, it was a gloss what they presented was what they wanted to present. They didn't tell everything. That was passed on to the Australasian Record, who repeated the articles.
Yeah. I noticed in my interview with Bill Johnson and the recent conversation I think I had with Gillian and Mevin, I think it was that interview, where we brought up the interview of him on the John Ankerberg show in 1984 and him during my interview, and what he was saying on the Ankerberg show seems to almost be the source material of what went into the general public propaganda machine of Adventism. And yet when we hear him speak again now, when obviously before he died, sadly, but he was more honest about what happened and more open about what happened. So he was part of that machine that put out this inaccurate information. And it just seems that they're reporting from that era, 1984, early 80s. They haven't done anything by the looks of that article to update themselves and educate themselves. And do you think that the Record, whoever wrote that, or the Record people who run the Record, do you think there's a sense of journalistic responsibility that they hold when they reproduce something like this and comment on it? Or do you think they just were ignorant about it and didn't, and just made a mistake?
I wish we knew who wrote it.
Mm.
Then we would have a better idea of how old they are. I suspect that some of them, perhaps even all of them, were not even born when these events took place. And they are entirely dependent on the reports that came out in the 1980s, which were coloured reports.
Mm.
So they are perpetuating old myths. That's the problem I've got with it.
Yeah, perpetuating old myths. So, as I mentioned, as journalists, would you even describe Record writers to be journalists? And if they're playing in that world of journalism, is there a responsibility at all to correct some of this misinformation, the perpetuation of this information?
I'm sure all of them at the Record office nowadays have been trained in journalism. But if we've got to take into account that they're working for the church, and if they were to write anything against the church, go outside of the square, then their job would be in jeopardy.
Yeah.
We've got to take that into consideration. That's anyone who's going to use this as a source needs to take that into consideration.
Yeah. That seems to be one of the things that colours the objectivity of their journalistic endeavours.
And your example of Bill Johnson at the John Ankerberg show is a very good example of that.
Mm.
At the time he gave it, he was working for the church. He was the review editor at the time, and was obliged to reflect the official church position.
Mm.
It was a disaster, actually, I might say.
Yeah.
That particular interview with John Ankerberg was a disaster.
Yeah.
He was made to look a bit of a fool. But I do agree with you. Since when he retired, he became much more open about things, and yeah.
And I guess I think it was my interview, season 2, interview 3 with Norm Young. I think he mentioned in there or off air that if you're employed by the church, you are expected to toe the line. I won't quote him on that. It may not have been him, but I've heard people say that if you're getting paid by the church, then you need to toe the line. But does that mean total control over people's personal opinions, total control. Like I've tried to get people from the Record and others to come on the program and share their side of it, and I have heard back from them. I haven't got permission to read the email, but so I'll wait till I hear if I can. But they've declined coming on the program and commenting. I find that that it kind of goes against, to me, the whole notion of being a journalist. Isn't the point to report honestly and authentically? But I guess if you're employed, what do you think of that balance between being employed and needing to toe the line and being a journalist presenting accurate information? Is that a conundrum or a problem that Adventist journalists must face?
Well, if they did lose their job, they probably would be able to find employment somewhere else. And that applies to non-church journalists, of course, those who are working for the newspapers. If they get fired, they can go to another newspaper. But I guess working for the church is a little different because your CV, as far as outside the church goes, your CV is probably looked on with some sort of suspicion.
The term witch hunt comes to mind when I think about this, the era you talk about in the biography here of Glacier View, the early 80s, and also in that great book by Harry Ballas, where he interviewed a lot of the pastors that were kicked out or suppressed or marginalized or encouraged to leave. There was very much a line in the sand back then where if you sounded like you supported Des Ford in any way, you simply wouldn't get a job or you would lose a job. Are we heading back into that territory, do you think, now? It seems to be more evident we are.
Oh, definitely, yes. General Conference President is a hardliner and has made sure that things have been put in place to keep tabs on Bible teachers at colleges, so on. I'm not so sure, but I think nowadays they have to sign a statement,
right,
of loyalty, don't they?
Quite possibly.
It was certainly mooted at one stage, but I don't know whether it came before.
Yeah.
But it is a climate where you're quite restricted here.
Yeah.
And it all revolves around the whole topic of intellectual liberty.
You're involved with helping the church. What is it that they've got, their encyclopedia, or what is that project called?
Yeah.
What's the project called?
Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists.
Right. And I'm not suggesting you comment on that, but how have you found your freedom within that to move and write accurately on the history?
Pretty good, really.
Yeah.
David Trim has set up a system whereby anything that is written goes, first of all, through a division editor who sends it out for peer review. So every article is peer reviewed by a scholar. So all of these editors are trained in trying to make the articles quite objective. We don't always achieve it, but I'm surprised how good it is. there are some articles. I've never had an article rejected. I've done 460 articles.
Amazing. Wow. Well done.
A tenth of the articles that are online are mine or more.
Wow.
But there are one or two which I myself doubted whether they would be printed. One involved a missionary who committed adultery, and his wife discovered the letters, love letters, and he suicided. And I wondered at the time whether that sort of thing ought to be written up, whether it would even see the light of day. But it did. It did. They were honest enough to put that in. It's part of the historical record.
Yeah.
It's a sad part, but nevertheless they put it in.
Why do you think they've got that side of them that is willing to just correctly report, and yet when it comes to Des Ford, it seems to be like a lightning rod of
Yes.
remain silent? Or
Yes.
why is that? Is it because it's just so damaging, or has it just become mythologized in such a way that you just can't touch anything to do with Des Ford?
Well, look, let's be honest about it. If the investigative judgment theory is demolished, you've knocked out one of the foundation pillars of the church. It's no wonder that they feel threatened. It's a continuing embarrassment.
Yeah.
Might talk about it a bit later.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
The reasons why it is an embarrassment.
Yeah. Let's definitely come back to that. I would love to talk about that more, because I think that is ground zero for all of this, all of the problems and tensions, and the unwillingness of the church, as exemplified in this conversation and this article and the record, of their unwillingness to be open, seems to just keep the wound festering.
Yeah, and that's what this article has done. It's opened up the old wounds again.
Yeah.
But looking at it specifically in some points, we've already said that it doesn't seem that it's written by people who knew what took place there. Perhaps I should just explain one reason why we've said that, and that is that they've said that there were 3 consensus statements emerged from the deliberations of the Sanctuary Review Committee. 3 consensus statements. Now, that indicates that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Because
there were only 2 consensus statements. What happened when I've read the minutes of the meetings, and what happened was that on a Friday morning before they went home, the 2 statements were read page by page, and question was called on each page, and then a vote was taken. Not sure whether it was by hand or certainly wasn't written. We don't know. We don't know figures as to who was opposed to it and who was against it, but it is labelled, those 2 are labelled consensus statements. One was about Ellen White and one was about investigative judgment. It was a consensus of sorts, and Des was happy with it. he said so. But as the morning went on, someone got up and said, "Look, can we fast track this because we've all got a plane to catch?" And right at the last minute, Chairman Neil Wilson put forward a third document, which we've since called the 10-point statement. And that was read. And it caused some alarm amongst some of the delegates. And they began to ask questions. What's this document going to be used for? We haven't discussed this document. They were fearful that it was going to be used as a tool for dismissal of Des. And Neil Wilson assured them that no, that wasn't going to be the case, but it was the case. But that particular statement was not put to the vote. No. It was not a consensus statement. So it's incorrect to say that there were 3 consensus statements. There were 2 consensus of a sort, only of a sort, because not everyone agreed with them. But the 10-point statement was not a consensus statement. So to say that there were 3 consensus statements indicates that the people who are writing this article in 2023 really don't know the facts.
Yeah, which is surprising considering how much information in recent times has been put out there for all to see. I can see where they got confused with 3 documents, but really the consensus statement was 2 parts and was a consensus statement. The 10-pointer statement was, as you said, not voted on. There was no consensus reached. In fact, people raised concerns. What is it going to be used for? Neil reassures everybody that it's not going to be used for dismissal purposes. And yet in the Record article, and I think you'll probably comment on this, the claim is that the majority agreed with the consensus statement that was opposing Des and used to oust him on grounds of, the majority all agreed that he was in error and not aligning with Scripture. And that is such a false claim. It's disparaging, it's incorrect, it's damning. And I think one of the reasons we're doing the Set the Record Straight mini-series is that I think it's important to correct this because it maligns Des Ford, it maligns those that were there, and it highlights the manipulation the church will go to suppress and rewrite history.
It's exactly right. They're trying to rewrite history.
Yeah. So and I said this to Bill Johnson in the interview I did with him before he passed. There was some hope that this consensus document that was read out, voted in 2 parts, gave people hope, and they thought, a lot of them left thinking this is a positive thing that's happened. And as you said, even Des and Bill agreed. Even Des said he could agree with it and go along with that. So they wheel out the 10-point statement and almost brush it under the rug. But what happened in the afternoon? The 10-point statement became the focus in a small side meeting that had nothing to do with voting or the general populace that was there that week. Tell us a bit about that.
I think Des himself feared that the statements would be worse than what they came out to be. And so when he saw them, I think it's fair to say that he was somewhat relieved because they agreed with him on many of the vital points. But it was the 10-point statement was really a statement indicating where Des differed from tradition, where Des differed from the 28 fundamentals, or was it 27 at the time? But, yeah. So it was a divisive document, really. The 10-point statement was a divisive document.
Yeah. I remember Norm Young saying that he felt like he was thrown under the bus because he was one of the main, or his involvement, I think there were 6 people involved in constructing the 10-point statement. And do you think it was the night before, on the Thursday? It was sometime a day or two before, wasn't it? It was something that Neil Wilson, whether under pressure or not, had to. I think he saw that a consensus document would be voted on favourably for Des, so he started to think, right, we've got to head that off at the pass. Do you think it was a day or two before that he got Norm and those other 5 to write that 10-point statement?
I don't know whether we'll ever know the answer to that.
Right.
I don't know whether we'll ever know his exact thinking and when it actually occurred.
I must watch the Norm Young interview again and see if he gave any more insights into that. But he definitely felt he was thrown under the bus, and he felt that he was asked to contribute to that statement to help make it clear what the real differences were. But he definitely was under the impression that it wasn't to be used against Des as far as heading towards dismissal.
Yeah.
So give us some more thoughts on the article where you'd like to kind of set the record straight. We've talked about the 3 consensus documents, which is false. There was really only one in 2 parts.
Well, another strategy that they've used to sort of bring some credibility to the article is to start quoting some of the scholars as if the scholars agreed with what happened. One of the names they use is Raymond Cottrell. I think this is a shameful strategy, really, to use a man's name in order to support the view that the investigative judgment theory is true. Raymond Cottrell himself didn't believe in the investigative judgment theory.
That's right.
So to use his name in this article is a shameful strategy.
Yeah.
Raymond Cottrell actually took a similar meeting to one that Des took in 1979, that he did. Des did it for the forum meeting on the West Coast. Raymond Cottrell did a similar meeting at Andrews University.
Yeah.
But didn't get into trouble for it. The difference was that in Des's audience, there were a lot of retired traditional conservative hearers that made trouble. Whereas with Raymond Cottrell at Andrews University, he had a scholarly audience who, I dare say, many of them agreed with him.
Yeah.
They saw no light in the investigative judgment theory, but they never said anything.
Yeah.
But Raymond Cottrell was fairly safe in saying what he said at that time. Later, Cottrell said that the Glacier View was a farce.
Yeah.
He said that, he wrote that in a letter to one of our Australian pastors, Pastor Vern Heiss, Lyle's father.
Yeah.
He said it was a farce. Raymond Cottrell also wrote a paper after 1980, a paper called Group Dynamics, in which he said the consensus statements were internally contradictory. And he pointed out a few of the contradictions that were made there. I think he wrote that about 1986. So it's probably correct to say that the consensus statements were, in his view, dribbling from both ends of their corporate moustache. But I think it's a shameful strategy to use the name of a man like Raymond Cottrell, who was an excellent scholar, and bring him into the argument to try to give weight to the view that the investigative judgment is true. I don't like their method in using Raymond Cottrell at all.
It's very Machiavellian. Des would often say that most of the scholars agreed with him, and I noticed in my series of interviews in season 2, which we're slowly uploading onto YouTube now into the public realm. I've got 2 up already if people want to scroll back and have a look. But I got the view that a lot of them wanted to kind of distance themselves from saying they agreed with Des, and a lot of them would say, oh, and we didn't actually agree with him. But when you dig a bit deeper, you realize they're not agreeing necessarily with some parts of it. But they all do agree that there's some pretty major issues with 1844 and the investigative judgment. And I think that's what he was referring to. And that, again, is in the Ankerberg show. You can tell from Bill Johnson that he's trying to bring across that, well, we didn't all agree. In fact, when placed against the scriptures, Des was found wanting. And that again, is another tactic, isn't it, to kind of divert the attention from the reality of what went on.
Well, that's another failing of this record article, this recent record article. They claim that the scholars agreed with each other, the administrators agreed with each other, and the scholars and administrators agreed with each other. It was all, one big happy family.
Yeah, it was the opposite.
When news hit the fan after Glacier View, there were many scholars in our institutions who rose up against it and wrote against it and wrote letters to Neil Wilson against it. I think of the Atlanta Affirmation, which was signed by, I don't know, a dozen scholars in the South of America. But this article seems to give the impression that they all agreed.
Yeah.
They didn't. They didn't agree.
That's probably the worst inaccuracy in this whole article.
Yes.
And it was the opposite of that. They're claiming the majority agreed that Des should go. The reality is the majority agreed with the consensus statement, and that they could work with Des and he shouldn't go.
Yeah.
So that to me alone is the smoking gun. The church leaders were hell-bent on getting rid of Des because Ellen White, the investigative judgment, were going to be questioned. And as soon as you question the investigative judgment, the only distinctive Adventist doctrine, then where do you place the statements that Ellen White supported that teaching with direct revelation from God? You're instantly dimming the view of her as a prophet or a messenger or a communicator, with a direct line to God. And why is that so damning for the Adventist Church?
Can you just rephrase that again?
If a lot of people, I think, think that if you just place Ellen White in a perspective of an inspiring person and a teacher, leader, that Adventism can work, and maybe it can, but the reality is that as a denomination, they have to support this notion that Ellen White is a prophet. And so is this why they're holding on so dearly to not questioning the investigative judgment? Because it in many ways damns her position as being a prophet.
Yes, it does. That's one of the side issues that came from Glacier View. The hardline view, of course, is that she was infallible. Des wasn't in favour of that view. We don't officially, we don't even hold that view for the scriptures. And neither did Ellen White, for that matter. But the danger is that we regard Ellen White as infallible. Now, in other words, if she's found to be untrue on one point, then it opens the floodgates, and that's what they're frightened of.
Yeah.
That's what they're frightened of.
What seems to me that a lot of the liberal progressives and the scholars and academics, etc., those that supported Des's general view, seem to think that the church wouldn't be as adversely affected if Ellen White was kind of demoted from prophet to the lesser light she claimed. But I have a sneaking suspicion that in some ways Neil Wilson and Parmenter and Tolhurst, they were correct that if the investigative judgment was questioned, if it was found to be unbiblical, can't defend it with scripture alone, I think that they're probably correct. There'd be a huge split. The church would rupture. Why do you think the liberal progressives don't see it that way? They seem to have a rosy kind of tinted glasses view that Adventism can work without 1844 being a unique doctrine within the church. Why the rose-coloured glasses, do you think?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think the answer would vary with each person, really, as to why they think that.
But collectively, there seems to be this, they've bought into the false hope that it's going to change, that somehow reason will win out, will win the day.
No, I personally have never believed that. I don't think there will ever be change. In fact, I was asked that by an Adventist high school teacher in 1980. He said to me, do you think they will change? I said, no, because the record of history has many instances in our history of closing the gates, as it were. You go back to
even back to Canright.
Yes, Canright.
Ballinger.
Snook and Brinkerhoff were probably among the earliest who disagreed, and they were ousted. So there's been a reluctance to change all the way along.
Yeah.
They will not change, really.
No. There's something galvanizing about seeing Ellen as a prophet as well, and I'm sure there's money in it as well.
And let's face it, if they did change, it would do away with the cause for existence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You would be left with some sort of list of beliefs that would match some other religious group in some way. very closely at any rate.
So in some ways, as purely as a political move and as a way to keep the Adventist Church distinctive, these leaders at the very top had to get rid of Des, because they saw in many ways more clearly than what the liberal progressives saw. They saw that the church would lose its identifying power and meaning. It would lose all purpose if Des was proven to be correct.
Yeah, I think they realised that.
Yeah, and I think that was very astute of them. And I guess I often ponder why, again, and like you say, it's perhaps impossible to answer because of its individuals' thoughts on it. But I see the Pearson, Wilson, Parmenter, Tolhurst totally seeing 20 years into the future. And they knew they had to get rid of Des Ford or the church would lose its true identity and purpose.
Yeah.
But at the time, and even today, this little cloud of bubble seems to hang around the liberal progressive, this sense of hope that it's going to change. And they're shocked, almost shocked that Des was kicked out and challenged. Whereas to me, I can see it as clear as day. They knew ahead of time, these leaders, Neil Wilson knew ahead of time that unless Des was gone, the church was going to lose its sense of purpose.
They referred to them as the pillars of faith.
Yeah.
Investigative judgment, Ellen White's invincibility. These are pillars which they defend.
Yeah.
And if one crumbles, the whole edifice
That's right.
collapses. Yeah, and that's true. It does.
Yeah, it does. It does collapse.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I've been interviewing the academics and the scholars, I'm just like, what? Like another interesting one is the last generation theology, when the progressives are shocked that Adventism could produce such a theory. To me, last generation theology is 95% of Ellen White's teachings and at the very core and DNA of Adventism. Why the naivety, do you think, again, with the liberal progressive? These guys are PhDs, they're smart, they're scholars. Why the tunnel vision and the seeming ability to be Pollyanna about the change that's just around the corner?
Forever hopeful, aren't they?
Yeah. It mystifies me.
Yeah.
What other points can you highlight from the Record article that we're talking about today?
One of the impressions that the Record writers would like to give is that they have been, in the past, ones who have been the purveyors of truth rather than misinformation. This is a part of the backslapping attitude. You know, we have always given the truth. I would take issue on that, and I'll just give one example that occurred, I think, yes, it was soon after Glacier View, it was in the 1980s, when a chap by the name of Lewis Walton published a book called Omega. And the pages of the Australasian Record advertised that book repeatedly. Now, Walton's thesis was that, well, he laid the Omega apostasy right on the head of Des. And he argued, he said that, well, Ellen White said that the alpha of apostasy was in her day, and the Omega would follow soon after. That's what she said. Lewis Walton left out the word soon after. What Ellen White was referring to was that the Omega of apostasy was what John Kellogg was propounding with his pantheism.
That's
And
right.
she identified that and said, virtually, that will blossom to the point where it will be an Omega. It will come to an end soon, she said, soon. Now, she wrote the statement in 1904, and by 1910, it had blossomed. She was right. In the Battle Creek Church, the headquarters church of the denomination, in 1910, there were about 260 people who were disfellowshipped because they went with Kellogg's view.
Wow.
Yes, it rocked the church. Now, when Lewis Walton published his book, I immediately saw.
Hang on, I've lost you there for a second, Milton. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. I definitely want to get this working again. I'm not sure if you can hear me still. Maybe those watching, if you could message me if we are still online. So I'm live apparently, but we've lost Milton. I wonder if Gillian, if you're still watching, can you message Milton and just get him to click that link again? And I'm just checking if there's a problem my end as well. Sorry, everybody. So we've got Milton back, but with no video. So Milton, if you can hear me, we need to somehow fix that. And in a minute, if we can't get Milton back on, I'll read some of the comments until he is. Okay. I've definitely got a little Wi-Fi problem. The joys of going live. Okay. So, Milton, I think if you can hear me, I'm just going to remove you, and if you can re-click the link and try and come back in, be great. And yeah, thanks those writing to me, letting me know I'm still here. That's great. Okay, Milton is checking back in, but no video feed, and I can't even bring you back on, Milton. So if you can hear me, you might need to reboot your computer and see if you can come back in that way. So I'll remove you again, and if you can just reboot your computer and then click the link again. So sorry about that. I'm not sure what's happened there. It looks like I thought I had a Wi-Fi issue, but I don't. I'm going strong. Something's happened Milton's end, unfortunately. So I'm going to read a couple of the interesting comments, and hopefully we'll have Milton back very soon. I'm absolutely loving this conversation. If you are enjoying it, maybe you'd like to subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. You'd be amazed how just simply subscribing to YouTube, or to click the like button there, or on Facebook, boy, it helps. The algorithms love that. Also, I've got a bit of a free song if you'd like to go and download that. It's called Never Be the Same. And if you go there, peterdixon.gumroad.com, you can find that, download it. And if you'd like to support what I'm doing, wow, that would be fantastic. It would really help. There's the details there if you'd like to make a donation. PayPal.me/Peter Dixon Music. I once was a musician. And then lockdown hit. I'm still doing gigs again now, but maybe only one a month. Whereas before I used to have to, I loved it, but I would do 3 or 4 a month at least. I think we've got Milton back. Let's see how we go. Awesome. I don't know what happened there, Milton.
No, I don't.
But you, excuse me, but you are back. Do you remember what you were saying? It was a very important point.
We were talking about Lewis Walton's book Amiga, weren't we?
Yep.
Yeah, he disingenuously deleted the word soon and introduced about an 80-year gap from 1904, which was the alpha of apostasy, and to bring it down to lob on Des's head in 1980. And labelled him as the Amiga of apostasy.
It's disingenuous, isn't it? Another manipulation.
But manipulation of Ellen White's words.
Yeah.
Which, so it gives the lie to the record article here that says they have always been ones who give the truth. They don't give misinformation at all.
Yeah.
So in advertising that book repeatedly, they were vehicles for misinformation.
Yeah. I'm just reading the last couple of lines there. I'll just bring it up on the screen. I'm not sure if people can see it there, but it just
at the time in 1980, when the book came out, I wrote to Bertoloviak at the General Conference Archives and explaining why I thought this book was not honest. And he replied and said to me, "Yes, I agree with you." In fact, I still got his letter. He said, even before the book came out, he had seen the draft of the manuscript and he had pointed out this very fact, that the word soon had been left out of Ellen White's quotation. He pointed it out to them. Yeah. So he agreed with me in my assessment of the book. And it wasn't only me, but others objected to it as well. Once again, Raymond Cottrell was one who saw that it was false. He published in October 1981 in the West Coast Forum newsletter, the California newsletter, his criticism of it. And Dr. Robert Johnson was another one who wrote against it, and also Dr. Walter Utt. So every a lot of people saw the error of Lewis Walton, but the record continued
to promote it,
to advertise his book and promote it.
And it was huge. It seemed at the time like every household had a copy.
Yeah, yeah. I've since burnt mine.
Incredible. It just seems like a machine, doesn't it?
But here in 2023, the Australasian Record is claiming that they've always been purveyors of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just read that a little paragraph. Unfortunately, this period of doctrinal challenge resulted in the loss of many from the church, and they just add "and from the faith," as if to say that they've kind of lost all hope. And then they've put, "It is clear looking back at this time that Record was a key vehicle for communication with church members and church leaders. We're very aware of the importance of that communication in the life and confidence of the church." And
Yes, yeah. Well, that's a gloss, isn't it?
yeah, it's gloss, and like you said earlier, self-congratulatory. What other things have you noticed in that article that we can comment on?
It highlights an editorial that Keith Parmenter wrote at the time, an editorial that was called Wedges. He didn't name Des exactly, specifically, but he did infer that those who disagreed with the traditional views were even satanic.
Yeah.
Which was pretty devastating sort of a thing to do. I mean, many church members at the time, those who didn't agree with tradition, were at the same time helping to pay his wages. And so to call them satanic is a terrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to say that the church membership, or many of the church members, quickly began to realise that the church papers, the church periodicals, were there to give a jaundiced view of the truth. And so we find after 1980, many independent journals within the church ambit arose. Thinking church members wanted to know really what happened, not just with the Glacier View, but all issues, everything that was happening in the church. They wanted an independent view. And so you had numerous independent journals that arose after 1980 because they were dissatisfied with the fact that the usual periodicals, like the Australasian Record, were giving a sugar-coated version of everything. Yeah.
Why do you think? I'm often wondering why people that doesn't seem to worry them. Like the people that wrote back to me and said they couldn't comment or wouldn't be able to come on the program, or that they weren't the right person to do so. They seem to be annoyed that I'm even asking them, like, just let it go. It's no big deal. That's just you guys talking in ivory towers. It's just politics. Don't worry about it. But for me, I feel like it's very important. Why do a lot of people just seem, and I'm not talking about grassroots people, you can take it or leave it, I don't mind what they think, but people that are involved with the machine of Adventism with such an obvious amount of suppression and cover up and propaganda and the inability to feel the freedom to share your own thoughts and views on a topic. Why are they so happy to just gloss it over? Like,
well, I think it's generally accepted that there is a slice of our society who accept anything that they read. They read the newspaper and they'll quote it and say, "Oh yeah, it must be true because I read it or I saw it on TV.
yeah,
I saw a video about it. It must be true." But there doesn't seem, with these people, there doesn't seem to be an ability to critically analyse. I know I like to think Aussies we have a name for doing this better than the Americans, but that's probably unkind to the Americans. But the British system of education seems to be better at training people to critically analyse things and not be so naive as to believe everything you hear or everything you read. But there are some people who still do that, unfortunately. Believe anything they hear or anything they see. Yeah.
The confirmation bias too. They hear what they want to hear and see what they want to
Well,
see.
that's probably another factor in it as well.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking too of those that are in leadership that suddenly are part of the propaganda machine, but that do have a conscience. Why are they so easily willing to say, "Oh, look, there's nothing to see here, guys," when they just suddenly know they're in that position of power? They know that what they're saying is inaccurate. Why are they suddenly, when I was younger, a lot of people, our generation were like, well, when we get to, leadership positions, we'll be able to bring about change. And a lot of my friends did achieve those leadership positions and are quite high up in the church right now as we're speaking. But they've all of a sudden lost that ability to kind of, or they've gained an ability to maneuver their conscience. And that interests me from a sociological perspective, perhaps. Why, when full of hope and a desire to be honest and authentic, when they achieve the position where they could affect change, they go into gloss mode as well. Why is that?
Well, I'm not a sociologist,
Yeah.
but I do accept the fact that it does happen.
Yeah. We'll have to ask Bob Wolfgram or Rick Ferret. They both.
It's a truism. It does happen. But you talk about the church machine. It is a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Of well, we're using the word propaganda, but it may be too strong. But it is a well-oiled machine through the publications. And one of the publications that is well-oiled and has been for years and years and years is the Sabbath School lesson pamphlet. Where the topics come around about every 5 years, they're repeated. And if you've been around in the Sabbath School for long enough, you know all the answers. And you sit in a class and you just hear the same things said over and over again. it's like the Roman Catholic Catechism. You have a question, and then the standard answer is given.
Mm.
You memorize that.
Mm.
So when you get your Sabbath school lesson pamphlet, you know most of the answers.
Yeah.
And you hear them repeated time and time again in the Sabbath school lesson. Very rarely does the Sabbath school lesson pamphlet introduce thoughts from non-Adventist writers to their detriment, really. I mean, you think of a guy like William Barclay, great scholar, but he never gets quoted. Or I say never, but maybe
Really?
occasionally. But that's just one example of men who can give contextual understanding of the text that under question. But they quote Ellen White or some other church dignitary, and yeah, so frustrating.
If propaganda's too powerful a word, what would you suggest it is? If it's a well-oiled machine, what's the well-oiled machine doing?
Oh,
If not
a softer term for
propaganda,
propaganda. I'd have to look up the Roget's thesaurus on that, I think.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier cowardly behaviour, and you're referring to people not putting their name to such important documents.
Yeah. Is that too strong a term?
No, I've heard it coming up a lot lately. A lot of people I'm interviewing that aren't apologists for the church, in sheer frustration, are using that word cowardly a lot. Yeah, I sadly have to agree.
You know, I don't think it's worthwhile trying to talk to faceless men and women.
Yeah.
It's not worthwhile.
Yeah.
If they are not prepared to put their name to something and own their opinion,
Yeah.
then they're not worth conversing with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I'll bring up a couple of comments and then I'll see if you've got any closing thoughts you want to add. There's just been some good dialogue going on. Another question someone did write to me during the week. They said, can you ask Milton if he knows if that original consensus document that was read out and voted on, the two-part one at Glacier View, is that original document available somewhere? I'm pretty sure there are kind of some rewritten and reworded ones around, but
Yes.
Is the original available to look at?
Yes, it did appear in the Adventist Review.
Okay.
And it was reprinted in the Australasian Record.
Right. Was it tweaked at all, or was it the?
Oh, I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think so. It was the same one that Des looked at and said that he was relieved and satisfied with its contents because it did come his way on a number of important points. Yeah.
What about the minutes? You mentioned earlier that you'd read the minutes. Where are they available?
They're in the General Conference archives.
General Conference archives and available online?
I've never.
Sure.
I don't know where. It's some years since I read that book. It's 20 years or so.
I'll give it another plug. It's a brilliant book. Available on Amazon.
I can't remember where I actually found those. I'm pretty sure they were in the General Conference archives online. They would have to have been online. I didn't go to the General Conference.
No. Apparently the actual meetings were recorded on an audio recording. I'm pretty sure I've interviewed someone that listened to them. They won't release them from the archives, but from memory, they were recorded, and if you go to the archives, you can have permission to listen, I think. Have you heard that, or is that just a rumor?
I have never listened to them. I only had the hard copy
Yeah.
print out. Yeah.
And who was it that took? Was it Fred Veltman that actually took some pretty good shorthand of what was going on as well?
That was Raymond Cottrell.
Oh, it was Raymond.
Yeah, he was a shorthand expert.
That's right. Yeah. Where are they available? His shorthand notes.
Well, that's the ones that I consulted, and I printed them out, and they would be in the Avondale archives, because all of my documentation for that book I gave to the Avondale archives. So that's another way that you don't have to go to the General Conference archives to get them. You can
I
go.
can drive down the road.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring up some comments. This is from, I've just got to find out who they're from. If you are watching on Facebook and writing a comment, please add your name somewhere in brackets. Otherwise, it just comes up as Facebook user. But this is Debbie Hooper-Cozier. Thank you for speaking up, Milton. I find your candor very refreshing. And you gents are speaking of something that is so important. When the church looks at history, archives, etc., they forget they're actually responsible for the dominant discourse. I'll just read it offline here. It won't all fit on the screen. In the church, this is the goal, of course. However, integrity is lacking, and that is very disturbing. I'll just bring some of these up, but if you want to comment, just go ahead.
I wasn't aware that Larry Christoffel had taken notes. That's new to me.
Oh, has someone written that, have they?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come to that in a minute. Stephen.
He took shorthand notes.
Okay. Boy, it'd be good to get both of those.
I don't know where they would be, whether they are in the General Conference archives or not. I have never resourced that. I just used Raymond Cottrell's
shorthand.
Someone has said, yes, it is on Adventist archives.
Okay, online. That's good to know. Stephen Beagles has written, even the New York Times is accused of being biased towards the left. Now, Gillian has written quite a long comment here. I'll bring up part of it and then read the rest of it, because it's always interesting to have Gillian Ford's view. She was there in the hot seat right next to Des. The main objection is the part that talks about 3 consensus statements. So we've covered this, but I'll read her thoughts on it. This was a bit earlier in our conversation. The first 2 were 2 parts of the consensus statement: Bible and E.G. White positions. The third, which isn't named, I think, have to go back and look, was the 10-point statement. Yeah, I won't read that because we have covered, answered a lot of that. Sorry, go ahead.
My first reaction when I read this article in the Record was, oh, here we go again, opening up all the old wounds about the investigative judgment theory and so on. And one would get the impression from this article that investigative judgment theory is absolute truth and can't be challenged. But look, there are many weaknesses in the investigative judgment theory. We might, if you want to, talk about some of them, but
yeah,
it is, in some respects, it's a very anti-Christian theory. That's what troubles me the most. It tends to, use metaphor as reality. That's one of the difficulties that I have with it. For instance, Hebrews says that when Jesus ascended to heaven, he sat down at the right hand of God. Now, the narrative of investigative judgment theory is that he sat down at the right hand of God, and they began to turn the pages of the books of record and, like Father Christmas, and decide who's been naughty and who's been nice. And have been doing that, well, the narrative says, since 1844. But when you read the book of Hebrews, of course, it indicates that he did it as soon as he ascended to heaven. But it's one example of how the metaphorical language is interpreted as a reality. It's generally accepted that God is omnipresent. Now, pray tell me, where is the right hand of omnipresence? Where is the left hand of omnipresence? If God is everywhere, and that point is debatable, but it's a theological statement, which we accept by faith. Where is the right hand? Where is the left hand? Where is the back hand? Where is the forehand? Where is the up? Where is the down when it comes to the presence of God? The book of Hebrews is obviously using metaphorical language. The right hand of God would perhaps suggest that he is in a position of authority. And he ascended to that position of authority. That's the reality that particular metaphorical phrase suggests. But it's only one instance of the whole narrative of investigative judgment theory that is where metaphors are taken and projected as reality. It also, the narrative of investigative judgment theory takes the concept of sin and the transfer of sin as a reality. That is, the narrative is that in the old sanctuary service, the sacrificial blood was, as it were, infused with the sin of the confessor, and it was taken into the tent, the holy place, and there it was lodged, and there it contaminated that room. It was left there until the Day of Atonement, when it was cleansed. It's all a very literal approach to the whole story. The sanctuary service was a metaphor. It was full of metaphors. Sin is not a commodity. It's an action. Sin is not like a packet of custard that you can take off the shelf and put in your shopping trolley and carry it home and put it in your pantry. Sin's not like that. But the narrative of the investigative judgment theory makes sin into a commodity that we literally transferred from one place to another and then washed away. it's such a kindergarten model of reality. When Scripture says that sin is cast into the depths of the sea, is that reality or is that metaphor? It's metaphor. Sin is not literally cast into the depths of the sea.
Mm.
It's a metaphor for the fact that God forgives sin absolutely, totally. Yeah, so that's only the beginning of my objections to the investigative judgment theory. You know, I've just stated one of them is that they treat metaphors as reality. That's the impression that the general church member gets, that it's reality. I think too that they misread the book of Leviticus when they say that the sin is taken from that is, the blood of the sacrifice is taken into the holy place. No, it wasn't. In most cases, it was not. If you read Leviticus 4, you'll find that the sins that were confessed by the commoners and leaders, and that takes in the majority of cases, the sacrificial blood from those sacrifices was not taken into the holy place at all. It was taken to the altar of burnt offerings and applied to the altar of burnt offerings outside the tent itself. So the whole narrative is misconstrued. It's not even true to the biblical record. And of course, the investigative judgment theory is based on one of the pillars is the year-day theory. My main objection to the year-day theory is that it's been used by countless number of gurus down through the ages, but it's never worked. Didn't work in 1843, didn't work in 1844, and they kept on changing the date. It just didn't work. And many gurus since have used the theory to set a date for the second coming of Christ. Of course, all of them have failed. Now, scientifically, if you were handed a formula to get gold out of coal, and every time you tried it, it didn't work, and you tried it 500 times, and it still didn't work, wouldn't it be time to give the theory away? The same with the year-day theory. It's been tried hundreds of times to predict something, and it's never worked. Why do you hang on to it? I ask. It's just not scientifically sensible. It's time to throw it in the bin. It doesn't work. So all the dates that are set with the use of the year-day principle are contrived. They're not historically accurate at all. I'll give you one or two examples. It's said that the beginning of the 2,300-day prophecy is 457 BC. That was the date of the decree. There's actually 3 decrees given by the Persians for different groups of Hebrews to go back to Jerusalem. There were 3. There was 538, 457, and 444. And they're all described in the book of Ezra. Ezra and the first early chapters of Nehemiah, the last books of the Old Testament, really, historically. 457 is taken as the beginning of the 2,300-year prophecy. The 2,300-year prophecy requires that it start from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. I'm quoting Daniel 9. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. Now, the first commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem was 538, not 457. In 538, they were given permission to start rebuilding Jerusalem. And they built, according to the book of Haggai, they built luxurious houses with cedar paneling and ivory decorations and so on. And the authorities looked at themselves and said, hey, what's going on here? Look at the temple site. All we've got is the foundations, and here we are living in our luxurious houses, and God's house is not built. Why? Because the Samaritans had objected, and they sent a posse across to Persia to find out whether these Hebrews had permission to rebuild their temple. And they looked in the archives, and they found, yeah, they did. They did have it. So the Samaritans came back with their tails between their legs. And the book of Haggai records how the leaders got the people together and rebuilt the sanctuary. And that was opened rededicated in 521, long time before 457. So the better date to starting the 2,300-day fulfillment is 538. That was the first decree to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. When you come to the 457 date, which is used by Adventists to start the 2,300-day prophecy, when you look at that in the book of Ezra, all it gave them permission to do was to reinstitute the judicial system in Jerusalem. And they also returned some of the temple artifacts. But it didn't have anything to do with building with wood and stone. It was simply to restore the judicial system. Now, I guess you could argue that it's all part of rebuilding Jerusalem. But the 538 day is a much better one, because that's when they actually did start to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, the 444 date is one that gave them permission to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem, make it a fort again, a fortified city. So of the 3 decrees, 538, 457, 444, the best one is 538. The second best would be rebuilding of the wall in 444. But the Adventists have chosen 457, which had no requirement for, or no permission for, building with wood and stone. Again, they've taken the worst option to start the 2000 prophecy. Can I just add one more
Yeah, and I'm really glad you're clarifying this.
from history?
Yeah, but can I ask one quick thing about that? And don't forget what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Why did William Miller choose 457 over 538?
Well, he worked backwards. He was on the cusp of 1843, so he counted back 2,300 and came to 457.
So he was reverse engineering.
Yeah, yeah. So it was all designed to revolve around the date 1844.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And the problem is that Ellen White in Vision supports William
Endorsed that.
Miller's.
She
She
endorsed
endorsed
that.
his
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the crux of the problem, isn't it?
That's the whole problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now go on with what you're about.
Yeah, I was just going to give another example of where history is distorted and dates are chosen arbitrarily. I'll take the 1260-day prophecy, for instance, 538 AD, 1798 AD. So what happened in 1798 AD? Oh, that's when the deadly wound was caused to the papacy. Well, and as proof of that, it said that the Pope was taken prisoner and taken over to France. And that was the deadly wound that brought about the end of the papal supremacy, as it were. 1260 days or years of papal supremacy. Now, in actual fact, what happened in 1798 was that Napoleon Bonaparte was in the process of building the French Empire. He didn't like the idea, or first of all, I should say, he accepted the idea that religion had a vital part to play in the cohesion of society. He recognized that the papacy had an important role for cohesion in his French empire that he was building, but he wasn't comfortable with the idea that the Pope was centered over in Italy. He wanted the Pope centered in France.
Right.
So he sent his army over there, fought against the papal army, virtually abducted the Pope and took him back to France, where he wanted him to make France the center of the papacy. The Pope was treated fairly well. He wasn't put in chains or anything like that. He was allowed to continue his operation as leader of the Roman Catholic Church. When he died, a short time later, Napoleon Bonaparte gave him a right royal funeral. You could hardly call this a deadly wound.
Yeah.
It's a flea bite. When you look at the history, it's more accurate to say that if you're looking for a deadly wound, it occurs later in the 1860s when the papacy began to lose one by one their papal states like Umbria and Bologna and so on. And by 1870, they lost the final papal state, and it was all the papal states were amalgamated into the Italian government. In other words, by 1870, the papacy had lost their main source of revenue, which they had been getting in taxes from the papal states. They lost squillions of lira as a result of the papal states being abolished and incorporated into the Italian government. That, in my opinion, is more like a deadly wound.
Yeah.
But that doesn't fit the 1206, the traditional interpretation of the 1260-day prophecy. They pluck these dates out of the air, out of history, and conveniently put them together so that it looks as if it fulfills the prophecy.
Yeah. Because they so clearly have to make it fill. It's, square pegs in round holes.
Yeah. So,
that is fascinating.
if we're not going to accept the 1798 date for the end of the 1268 prophecy, then we've got to look for another starting date. It's said that 538 was when the Pope came to power. Look, that also is another. Don't let me start on that one. That's another contrived date. 538. The papacy didn't really come to power until the 13th century AD. That was the height. That was the height of its power. It rose gradually. It's very hard to identify a particular date.
Yeah.
And say it began to get power.
Yeah.
So,
and yet, sorry, go ahead.
I would question all of the dates. In fact, all of the dates that have been posed. I've read a lot of the Millerite papers. They're called the Advent Herald and the Early Signs of the Times and so on. They had numerous ways of arriving at 1843 and 1844. One of them was that the 2300 began in 481 BC and finished in 1819 with the destruction of Mohammedanism, so-called. Has Mohammedanism been destroyed?
No.
No.
What was that date?
1819.
Yeah.
Don't ask me what they used to say that Mohammedanism was destroyed. I forget at this stage what it was. Another, they had a lot of these rainbows with the dates at one end and one at the other. One was to arrive at 1844. They took the phrase in the story about Nebuchadnezzar being mad for 7 times or 7 years, and so they calculated that was 7 times. When you multiply that by 360, it comes to 2,520 years. So they calculated that from 1843, count back 2,520 years, and you come to 677 BC. And that was when Nebuchadnezzar received his madness. Yeah. But it all has to finish in 1843. Every one of these ones do.
Yeah.
Another one was to assume that the world was 6,000 years old. And in 1843, they counted back 6,000 years and agreed with Archbishop Usher that creation occurred in 4,157 BC. The flood occurred in 2,409 BC, and the Exodus occurred in 1642 BC. So with that 6,000 years of history up to 1843, they said, okay, what the doctrine of the millennium teaches us is that in 1843, after 6,000 years, after 6 millenniums, we now will have another millennium beginning in 1843, which will be the 7th or perfect millennium. So it was all based on Archbishop Usher's idea that creation was about 4,157 BC. Look, they were absolute nutters. They really were. No other word can describe them. All these fanciful ideas and ways of working out 1843 and then 1844 as the coming of Christ. Changed, of course, later to the beginning of the investigative judgment rather than the coming of Christ.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just a mess. It really is a mess.
Well, I'm so glad you just gave some insights into that. I've had trouble understanding it, but that last little 20 minutes of information has been gold. I'm so glad that you shared that.
Have I got time just to add one more?
As much time as you like. Yeah.
The doctrine does not recognize the fact that Daniel 9 is a conditional prophecy. The prophecy was made on the condition that the Hebrew nation was to make an end of sin. At verse 24 of Daniel 9, they were to make an end of sin. Now, the question we should ask ourselves is, well, did they? Did the Hebrew nation make an end of sin? And when you study the history of the intertestamental period, that's not a study that Adventists major in. It's rarely taught at college level. When you study that history, you find that the Jewish nation engaged in simony, that is, selling the high priesthood to the highest bidder. And there were times when the highest bidder who got the high priesthood was not even a Levite. So in God's terms, they were not doing what he wanted them to do, what he had prescribed them to do. There are other aspects of their history. For instance, they did not reintroduce the training of the children, young children, in their educational system after they came back from Babylonian captivity. It wasn't until a woman arose quite late, I forget her name, and she said, why aren't we educating the youngsters in the Hebrew traditions and so on? And she caused them to rectify that situation. But of course, the climax of their sin was the rejection of Christ. They did not put away sin. They did not. And so that prophecy in Daniel 9 could never be fulfilled.
Mhm.
It fell by the wayside.
Mm.
It was a conditional prophecy, and they didn't fulfill the condition. That's something which we do not recognize.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that before.
One more,
Yes.
if I may,
Yes, please.
and it's probably the most important one, in my opinion. The claim that sacrificial blood taken into the holy place defiled it, and then on the Day of Atonement, sacrificial blood had the exact opposite effect, that is, it cleansed, is contradictory. I remember my first year out of college, I was in Ballarat, going from door to door trying to enroll people in the Bible correspondence course, and I came across a Jewish rabbi. And I got talking to him about the sacrificial services and the sanctuary. And I happened to mention the fact that the sacrificial blood defiled the sanctuary. He threw up his hands in horror. He said, no. Sacrificial blood never defiled anything. Sacrificial blood always cleanses, he said, because it's a symbol of forgiveness.
Wow.
Now, from a Christian viewpoint, he's looking at it from a Hebrew viewpoint. From a Christian viewpoint, it figures that the sacrificial blood represented what? Represented the blood of Christ. Now, to say that the blood of Christ defiles anything, carries sin and defiles something, is absolutely sacrilege.
Yeah.
The blood of Christ always cleanses. And that Hebrew rabbi virtually said so.
Yeah.
To say that sacrificial blood at any time defiles anything is anti-Christian. It's anti-gospel. It's anti-Christ. And is it any wonder that we have been labelled by others a cult? That's one of the main reasons, apart from the fact that we believe in Ellen White as infallible. And that's another reason why we are labelled as a cult. This is another vital reason why we are labelled a cult. We are not entirely Christian. We are cultic.
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry to say so.
No, I agree. Doomsday cult. That's why this is so interesting and so important, because not only is the investigative judgment incorrect or in error, it's anti-Christian. It's anti-gospel.
Yeah. And I've got to say that when I read articles like the one we're talking about in the record, I say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they write. They do not know what they write. They do not see the significance of what they write. And it's no cause for backslapping and self-congratulations.
Yeah.
No cause whatsoever. They will hang their heads in shame. Yeah. I've said enough, I think. Put my neck on the line.
You might be getting a call. Now, the encyclopedia, Milton. Does that ever worry you that they might fire you from?
It does, but I like to think that that the scholarly atmosphere will prevail, that they will look at it from that viewpoint.
Like it did in 1980. See, the interesting thing, Mark Anthony has written here, and I totally agree. I don't know if we'd be able to make it happen, but I need to see a debate between Milton and an SDA scholar or apologist there. I have people on the program that defend the investigative judgment, and I let them speak, but I don't have the skills or the knowledge to combat what they're saying. Yeah, so I'd love you, and I know it's almost impossible to suggest it because I'm just so glad to even have you on the program today. It's such a rare experience. But I'd love to have you or someone that could just, as they're presenting there and reeling off the glossy investigative judgment version, that someone was there to say, hey, that's wrong. You know, there were three options, 444, 538, 457. This was the better option, and why. So maybe I can plant the seed that we could have a debate with you and an apologist.
I notice, I don't want to prolong this too much, but I notice someone has made the relevant comment that the church has made Satan the sin bearer, the ultimate sin bearer. They're obviously talking about the Azazel, the second goat in the Day of Atonement service, who is, the bottom line in the investigative judgment theory is that on the Day of Atonement, the sacrificial blood of the first goat, the Lord's goat as it's called, was transferred to Azazel and carried out on the goat as the goat was led out into the wilderness. And the poor goat was, according to the traditional story, the poor goat was tossed over the edge of a cliff, and all the sins of the past 12 months went hurtling down into the ravine below, and there they stayed. The word Azazel, it ends in EL, and that indicates one thing, and that is that's the word refers to Elohim, EL, Elohim. The word itself, Azazel, means God. Azaz in Hebrew means strong. So the word Azazel means strong God. It's rather an inappropriate term for Satan. It more likely refers to the fact that it was the strong God who took the sins away from the camp of Israel, indicating complete forgiveness. But yeah, that's another topic, a big topic to discuss the Day of Atonement service. We misinterpret it entirely. We think of it as a cleansing service, when really it's a reconsecration service of the sanctuary, bringing it back to its original pristine condition. And the sins that had been forgiven on a daily basis they stayed that way. They were forgiven on a daily basis. But on the Day of Atonement, the cleansing involved not the sins of individuals, but any sins that the priesthood might have committed accidentally in the performance of the ritual, or any sins which they had performed. Yeah, once again, accidentally in their say contact with dead bodies away from the camp of Israel, whatever, and had come into the service to perform the services. And really what the Day of Atonement service was doing was starting off the new year, the clean sheet, getting rid of every possible circumstance that had caused any sin whatsoever. It wasn't the sins of individuals; they'd been forgiven already. But yeah, don't start me on that one. We do not understand
Yeah.
the Hebrew concept of the Day of Atonement service. And
Yeah.
that's largely because our pioneers didn't understand it.
And yet it's such an important point if you are to follow the Christian faith.
But if you read what the Jews themselves teach about it, what they think about it,
Yeah.
totally different thing, a totally different idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, do you have any closing statements to make about the record article?
Well, no, I think
Covered everything?
I think I've covered everything by saying that Father forgive them, for they know not what they write. Yeah.
Mm.
Sadly.
Mm. Wow. Well, I don't want this interview to end. I always love hearing you talk and share your thoughts, Milton. So I really appreciate you being on the program today. We've had a really great audience and lots of conversation. Not sure if there's anything there that you want to add to that you can see coming up from the comments while you're just having a quick browse there. I want to just mention this book that you wrote, which Desmond Ford, reformist, theologian, gospel revivalist, and you can buy the latest updated version of that on Amazon. I have maybe 5 or 6 copies here, which I'm happy to sell and post out to people in Australia at least. It's a great book, and I'm hoping to officially twist your arm, Milton, and Gillian's as well, and do an audio book of this book. So we need to see if we can chat about that, because I'd love to see this come out as an audio book. A lot of people enjoy listening rather than reading these days. So we can chat about that. So any thoughts on any comments you can see? There's been so many.
I'm just quickly reading some.
While you're checking there again too, someone did comment that the link I put up to my free song is not working, and that is true. I just checked it, so apologies for that. I'll post the free song link in the comments later. Yeah, I do apologize for that. I just changed the name from Peter Dixon to Omni Dreaming as a broader business name.
I might just make an afterthought about Azazel.
Sure.
When the 2 gates were chosen for the Day of Atonement service, the instructions were that those 2 gates were to be as alike as possible, preferably twins, but certainly from the same flock, and they both were to be without spot or blemish. That, of course, is understandable, because at the time of their choice, they didn't know which one was going to be sacrificed and which was going to take the sin out into the desert. But if we regard the second goat, the one who is alive and taken out into the desert, if we regard that as Satan, it's rather an imperfect symbol, isn't it? To have one that looks exactly like the one that represents Christ. If they were going to represent one that represented Satan, it would be more appropriate to pick the mangiest looking goat, deformed and near death, to represent Satan. But they chose one that was perfect as possibly as they could. That's an inappropriate symbol for Satan.
Yeah.
That's my final comment on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And is there a parallel also with Adventism, Adventist teaching, to suggest that the perfection of Jesus as the pure sacrifice, they're suggesting that means we can emulate that, whereas the reality is to have a sacrifice for an atonement, you need a pure being.
As possibly as close as possible as they could get.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
So Jesus was that perfect sacrifice.
Yeah. Oh yes, yeah.
Not to be not perfect so we could emulate it, but perfect because you need to have a perfect sacrifice for it to mean something. Yeah. Okay, well, the conversation is going to keep on going over there in Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, in the description below, you can join our Facebook group, watch the live content, as well as join in the conversation. Well, Milton, let's bring up, this is a nice, someone's just said, this is Claire Greg Breach. Great points, Milton and Peter. It's nice to have a positive comment there. Thank you so much for joining me today, Milton, and I certainly hope we cross paths again very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, we bid you farewell.
Thank you. Thank you again.
See you later.